Um, Lisa Wood is an award-winning author, screenwriter, and educator. Her screenplays have won Best Horror, Best Afrofuturism Horror or Sci-Fi, and Best Short Story Screenplay Awards at several film festivals. Wood teaches creative writing, literature, and composition at Shenandoah University and the Speculative Fiction Academy. Her paper is titled Blaxploitation, Black Gothic, and Black Agency in Horror. Lisa, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I am going to share my screen, but good morning, everyone, or hello, everyone, I should say, considering we're from all over the world now. Welcome to my discussion on Blaxploitation, Black Gothic, and Black Agency in horror. Okay, and I hope to be shared at this point. Looks like it. Okay, I'm gonna go forward. If not, please shout out that you can't see, and I'll come back in. Okay, oops, well, we've skipped the first screen, that's fine. All right, so again, I thank you for the introduction. I'm the founder of the Speculative Fiction Academy and an English professor. I just earned my PhD in creative writing, and my dissertation title is Diversity in Genre Fiction, the Agency of Black Authors in Contemporary Horror Fiction. So I wear a lot of different hats. I guess I can call myself a public speaker since I've had the distinct honor of being the 2022 guest author at the In Your Right Mind conference at Seton Hill University. And I have an even more direct association with this material that we'll talk about today, in that I'm a screenwriter who has competed internationally in the festival circuit and come away with a few successes along the way. And I'm also a dark fiction author who dips her toe in mystery, romance, and psychological horror spaces. All of those experiences, as well as the things that are inherent to me as a Black person in America and a horror creative, prepared me for this discussion. Black creators in both film and literature have been relegated to producing content that speaks of the race narrative, whether fiction or nonfiction entries. Dating back to the race films of the early 1900s, Black people had to carve a way that was separate from the mainstream within the genre to ensure that Black images were depicted in positive lights rather than just servants and or criminals. That practice continues today and speaks of both the lack of agency and the reclaimed agency that Black creators experience. This presentation will touch upon the early race films, Blaxploitation, and the Black horror movies that paved the way for burgeoning Black Gothic movement, relating the importance of impact of the imagery, the antagonists, and the messages that can be learned from the screen. It will also discuss the impact of Candyman on society, race relations, and the horror genre in general. So let's jump into it. Okay. Black creators have struggled to find markets that recognize their contributions as normal and not other. The search for a construct that scholar Kenitra Brooks of Searching for Sycorax's and Sycorax's Daughters fame termed fluid fiction led creators to make their own markets in the form of race films, Blaxploitation, and Black horror in the case of motion pictures, and slave narratives, issue books, and Afrofuturism in literature. While this allows for Black creators to produce work that they're proud of and that targeted audiences can connect with, the reach is often limited until recently. But what are race films? Race films are movies that were produced with Black audiences as the intended market. They were prevalent between 1915 to early 1950s, and often were comprised of all or predominantly Black casts and had a Black crew, producers, writers, and directors attached. Race films showcased Black people in a variety of roles, unlike early film submissions released by major studios that routinely cast Black actors as servants, porters and maids, the help, or entertainment, singers, dancers, and the like. These films counter traditional depictions of Blackness on screen, dispelling the stereotypical and disparaging precedents set in movies where white actors appeared in blackface, or where Black people were quietly tending to the duties of servitude in the background, or where they were omitted from society altogether. The need for race film speaks of the response to the oppressive machine that relegated Black imagery to lesser or other status. While race films were a direct result of segregation, and some might even say they were a mirror of it, they stoked a desire to produce images depicting Black people as real people, rather than as caricatures of themselves in equal parts subservient, buffoonish, and villainous, and to have some control over the messages being propagated, consumed, and internalized by other races as well as their own. Son of Ngagi is the first horror film to feature an all-Black cast. Released in 1940, the monster is a creature brought back from one of the doctor's excursions abroad. The creature is kept in the basement of the doctor's house and, upon drinking a potion found there, turns murderous and slays the doctor. An unwitting couple inherits the home and later discovers the creature in residence. And of course, things don't turn out well for anyone involved. The film was written by Spencer Williams, who was a pioneer in the Black producer and director spaces and an accomplished actor in his own right. Think Amos and Andy. This film, as well as the work of Oscar Micheaux, who is regarded as the most successful African-American filmmaker of the first half of the 20th century, is part of a genre of movies called race films. Race films did so many things at once for Black actors and filmmakers, writers and creatives in that space, not the least of which was to showcase the talents of a whole group of people who might have otherwise gone unnoticed. Okay, I just want to make sure that's not blocking you. Okay, Hollywood did take notice, even if viewers from the background didn't. People like Paul Robeson, Ethel Waters, Lena Horne, and many other actors and actresses who have become part of Black Hollywood royalty appeared in race films before making a splash in mainstream media. In fact, Harry Belafonte would make his first feature film debut in a race film called Bright Road. Race films also brought to the fore true concerns within the Black community, ones that related directly to real life experiences, such as living in the city versus living in a rural area, colorism, religion, and secular life. Race films also answered the imagery espoused by D.W. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation, specifically in Micheaux's 1919 film Within Our Gates, where a lynching was realistically depicted. Race films attempted to change the perception of Black people, but after the 1950s, when Black visibility in the world, led to more mainstream representation on the silver screen, and led to the demise of an end of the era in filmmaking, Black filmmaking, it would be decades before there would be another movement of its kind. Enter Blaxploitation. The 1970s brought in what were called Blaxploitation films, a genre named as such by NAACP chapter Junius Griffith. The genre, which produced hundreds of titles, including action, westerns, comedy, drama, and horror, was as polarizing then as it is now. Some found the material offensive, stating that it perpetuated stereotypes, especially those geared towards Black men, while others claimed the films featured self-aware Black males who knew what they wanted and what they had to do to get it. Regardless of which side of that line drawn in the sand you fall, it is impossible to ignore these films and the impact that these films had on Black moviegoers across the United States. There were many horror gems produced in that era, such as Ganja and Hess, Blackenstein, and the movie that started it all in 1971, Blackula. While these films were polarizing during the 1970s and are still controversial today, when looked at through a modern lens, there are some important considerations to be taken into account about that style of movie as a whole. Black people were cast in leading roles again, leading roles. And while these movies are largely considered to work in the extremes, films like Dr. Black and Mr. Hyde had a wide array of Black characters, ones who were doctors, scientists, detectives, pimps, prostitutes, business owners, and average Joes. This kind of variegated approach to movie making presented a kaleidoscope of human experience through a Black lens. But it too had a shelf life. Now let's dive into Black horror, where exploitation and race films were made predominantly for Black audiences and sought to reflect Black people on screen in ways that were more reflective of real life, as doctors, lawyers, detectives, shop owners, as well as hustlers, pimps, and gamblers. Black horror goes further, has a broader focus. Black horror movies are films designed for viewers from all ethnic backgrounds, and they showcase the Black experience, the good, the bad, the horrific. The race films of the early 20th centuries did not change the mindset of society about Blacks and our contribution to entertainment. Not really. The Blaxploitation films produced prolifically in the middle of the 20th century have problematic undertones that impede the genre's legitimacy in study, scholarly or otherwise. And why, you may ask? Well, the effectual role reversal, that the exaggerated masculinity, bravado, and inherently hip demeanor that many of the actors portrayed in Blaxploitation films didn't really help matters. In fact, it had an opposite effect, one that perpetuated the concept of a marked difference between communities, encouraging the idea that there's little to no common ground between Black and white people. The focus on showcasing these differences, celebrating them in a manner that appeared antagonistic, critical, and disparagingly humorous, further cemented the notion that there is an other. This alienated white viewers. The whole thing had a polarizing effect as opposed to a unifying one. Characters created to embody the stereotypical characteristics that society has been groomed to recognize as Black perpetuates the same problem as the concept of tokenism does. They create a false reality of acceptable Blackness and paint a whole subset of people with the same brush. This practice results in an effectual separation of Black and white, in as much as separate products for separate audiences does. So what now? As the 1990s dawned, filmmakers searched for new ways to showcase Black people and Black life. The newest foray into this effort from a speculative fiction standpoint is Black horror. Think Death by Temptation, Tales from the Crypt, presents Demon Knight. Eve's Bayou, Tales from the Hood, Vampire in Brooklyn, and of course, Candyman. Even though many of these movies didn't fit the criteria that was the undercurrent of race films in Blaxploitation, though the latter less so, that is to say that they weren't written by Black people. They didn't have predominantly Black crew or cast. The new crop of Black horror films focused on showcasing Black people in scenarios behaving as they would in real life. Films in the Black horror genre in the 1980s and 90s took a page from the Blaxploitation era, producing films that served as racial delineators, adding fodder to the argument of segregation or separation. At the same time, there are some concepts that made it out into the world that inadvertently perpetuated stereotypes set in place by white filmmakers years before. The 1992 release of the movie Candyman did a lot of things. It cemented a Black character as a terrifying antagonist who was as formidable as his press suggested on screen. It featured a Black character with staying power, considering how few minutes he appeared. It secured an irrational fear in the back of every viewer's mind, regardless of age, race, or creed, one that made them remember what happens if the warning not to summon him was ignored. It also revealed some of the racial biases that exist within the Black community, putting them on display and creating a polarizing canvas on which we were torn about how to feel. One might assume that the murder of a Black man, or perhaps socioeconomic status, uh, is what was being dissected. But there was a more insidious point to be made with this film. The glimpse into the brutality of racism is artfully displayed here, forcing moviegoers to reckon in some way with what has occurred in order to experience the story they paid to see. Then, a muted form of racism came to fore. A microaggression within the Black community was displayed in startling clarity, one that sowed the seeds of the kind of racial honesty that films like Jordan Peele's Get Out and Us harvested. When Bernadette, doomed Black sidekick of Candyman's love interest, Helen Lyles, is lumped into the collective white people, quote unquote, white people bucket by Anne Marie, the mother of the child who would later be kidnapped by Candyman. Even though she was Black, Bernadette was not seen as such because of the nature of her presence in Cabrini Green. Her appearance and reason for being there was at the forefront, regardless of her shared racial makeup. That's key. Familiar landscapes are shown in that film and its 2021 remake. In Inner City, a tenement slum that put viewers, both Black and white, at ease because these locales have become associated with movies cast with predominantly Black actors. That in and of itself is problematic. Either way, there is another thing that this film did, and something that solidifies its existence as an endearing classic and a shining moment for Black horror. It is the first Black horror film that was viewed simply as horror for the masses. The 2000s represented a new, more outspoken version of Black horror. Black filmmakers made movies that garnered mainstream audiences, including the Scary Movie franchise created by the Wayans brothers that successfully linked horror and humor. Black actors found more work that did not force them to perpetuate the stereotypical behavior that their counterparts in the early 1900s were relegated to. Black stories were being told in a more mainstream and consumable way, but there was still a delta between the understanding of experiences that a diverse lens could provide to mainstream viewers. The 2017 release of Jordan Peele's Get Out changed the vantage point of Black horror and its underpinnings that were rooted in racism, discrimination, and classism. It gave life to the idea of elevated horror. This groundbreaking film also reinforced the concept of disparate fear in a meaningful way. Get Out crafts a tale of shattered illusions and the body coveted that manages to bring to life the very real fear that Black Americans experience at some point in their lives, that worry that something isn't as it seems. Audiences came together to watch the horror film like they did in the 1980s. They were able to scream directions at the screen, talk with the people around them about what was happening in the story, and react out loud as a result of this shared experience. The difference this time was that both Black and white audiences could see themselves on screen, see the truths and the exaggerations for what they were, and take away messages that were fodder for open discourse once the lights came on. There are other films that have dipped a toe in this pool, both before and after this one, but the forward momentum shown in Black horror, especially when viewed in isolation, began with this work. Get Out and subsequently Us successfully bring Black images to the screen that are relevant and reflective of reality, while at the same time bringing all audiences to the table to review, reflect, and consume. Okay, so we understand race films, Blaxploitation films, and Black horror now. But what does any of that have to do with Black Gothic? This term is starting to pick up steam in both the creative and academic spaces, but what does it really mean? And let me be clear, Black Gothic is not to be confused with the Black Goths, which are Black people who subscribe to the Gothic lifestyle. If you're wondering what being a Black Goth means or what it refers to, the most succinct description or definition that I've found to encompass that mindset is here. Put simply, a goth is someone who finds beauty in things that others consider dark. Happy researching if you're interested in that, but back to the topic at hand. Black Gothic speaks to the relationship between suffering in the Black community and the very history of inherent bias. Let me start with Beyonce as I work to illustrate the concept, because I think the work she's done in this space is important to the conversation. Beyonce's Lemonade album was groundbreaking for a lot of reasons, but for the discussion, this discussion, let's consider her use of space and consequence. With lyrics that were more like poetry, Beyonce brought the darker side to love and relationships in the consciousness, to the consciousness of a society that was used to getting one or the other in a most watered down form. While she laid bare emotions rarely delved into in such a public arena, she also made use of imagery that comes right out of the horror stable, which made a few of us quite happy. The large Southern homes used in her Sorry and Formation videos harken back to antebellum South, the metaphors and apathy, the deep gritty noir that permeates the tone, the beat. These attributes spoke to many Black horror creatives.
Lisa, if I might interrupt, you're about out of time, so I need you to wrap it up.
I am okay, I can do that. Anyway, watch the video, hold up, it's fantastic. Let me stop there. So let me say in the end, to sum up what Gothic is, the term Gothic has been used as a synonym for horror in the past. We all know this. How does it relate to Black Gothic? Well, Blaxploitation of race films and Black horror films and the agency within, it's the very bridge that connects all of them. I can make the slide deck available to anyone who'd like to see the last 5 slides. Thank you for your time.